Welcome to Testaments of Faith, Joseph. From Dreams to Slavery, The Journey of a Chosen One. Chapter 1. The Beloved Son and the Prophetic Dreams. The golden sun bathed the hills of Canaan, reflecting off the vast fields where Jacob's sons tended the flocks. But among them, Joseph stood out. He was not just another among the 12 brothers. Since childhood, his father had shown him special favor, for he was the son of the woman he had always loved, Rachel. The symbol of this favoritism was a tunic of many colors, a gift that not only set Joseph apart but also ignited the hatred of his brothers. They did not see him as a brother but as a rival, stealing the affection they longed to receive from Jacob. However, it was not just the tunic that fueled their anger. Joseph possessed something even more powerful: prophetic dreams. One morning, filled with excitement, he ran to share one of his dreams. "I dreamed that we were binding sheaves in the field, and my sheaf rose and stood upright, while yours gathered around and bowed before mine." A heavy silence fell between the brothers, broken only by bitter smirks. "Do you really think you will reign over us?" The contempt in their eyes was evident. But Joseph did not stop there. In another dream, he saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing before him. Even Jacob was puzzled. "Will I, your mother, and your brothers truly bow before you?" Yet, deep down, he kept these words in his heart. Envy turned into something dangerous. The brothers did not just hate Joseph, they wanted to see him destroyed. Every dream seemed like a prophecy, a provocation, a warning that he would have a great destiny while the others would be left behind. And before they could allow that to happen, they made a dark decision. Joseph had to disappear. Chapter 2. The Conspiracy and the Trap. The day was hot when Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were pasturing far from home. Excited, he set off, unaware that this journey would change his destiny forever. As he approached, the brothers spotted him from a distance. Hatred boiled like lava in their hearts. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them sneered. "Let's kill him and throw him into a pit. We'll say a wild beast devoured him and see what becomes of his dreams." The plan was set, but one brother, Reuben, felt a weight on his soul. He did not want to see Joseph's blood spilled and suggested an alternative. "Let's not kill him. Throw him into this cistern in the wilderness." His secret plan was to rescue Joseph later and return him to their father. But while Reuben was away, fate took an unexpected turn. A caravan of Ishmaelite merchants approached. Judah, always practical and shrewd, saw an opportunity. "What profit is there in killing our brother? Let's sell him to these merchants. After all, he is our flesh and blood." Within moments, Joseph was dragged away, his hands bound, his voice choked with fear. He screamed, begged, but his own brothers sold him like merchandise. When Reuben returned and found the empty cistern, he tore his clothes in despair. But it was too late. Joseph was already on his way to Egypt, sold as a slave. Chapter 3. The Deception and Jacob's Sorrow. The brothers knew they had to create a convincing story. They took Joseph's colorful tunic and dipped it in the blood of an animal. The evidence of their betrayal now became the symbol of an eternal grief. When they returned to Jacob, they presented the tunic and said with false innocence, "We found this. See if it is your son's tunic." Jacob grasped the blood-stained fabric, and his soul shattered. "It is my son's tunic. Surely a wild beast has devoured him." The old patriarch tore his garments and covered himself in ashes, drowning in unbearable grief. No words of comfort could soothe the pain of a father who had lost the son he so dearly loved. While Jacob mourned, Joseph was taken to a foreign land, unaware that his suffering was far from over. The life he knew was over. He had been torn from his home, betrayed by his own brothers, and sold like an object. But what Joseph did not know was that God was with him. Egypt would not be his end. On the contrary, Egypt would be the stage where his dreams would come true. Chapter 4. From slave market to Potiphar's house. The chains tightened around Joseph's wrists, marking his new reality. He was no longer the beloved son of Jacob, but a mere slave in the bustling market of Egypt. Men and women were bought like cattle, sold to the highest bidder as the scorching sun burned their skin. Still dazed by his sudden downfall, Joseph looked around, trying to understand where God was in all of this. Why did the dreams he once had seem so distant now? Among the buyers stood an imposing man observing Joseph with great interest. His name was Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard. There was something about this young Hebrew that caught his attention. Perhaps his posture, his strength, or the resilient spark in his eyes. Potiphar raised his hand and made an offer. In the blink of an eye, Joseph was taken away, now a servant in the house of one of the most powerful men in Egypt. Little did he know that God was already preparing the path for something far greater. In the months that followed, everything Joseph touched prospered. Potiphar's household flourished under his care, and the blessings of God were evident. Potiphar soon realized that this slave was different and placed him in charge of everything he owned. Joseph, once a young dreamer in Canaan, now managed the household of an Egyptian official. He was far from home, but God had never left his side. Chapter 5. The Seduction and the False Accusation. Potiphar's house prospered under Joseph's leadership, and his presence did not go unnoticed by Zuleika, Potiphar's wife. Joseph was young, strong, and handsome, and soon he became the object of her desire. At first, it was just glances, but soon she began to approach him, whispering words of seduction. Yet Joseph always turned away, knowing that this was a test of his loyalty to both God and his master. But Zuleika would not give up. Day after day, she tried to lure him with promises of luxury and threats of ruin. Joseph, however, remained steadfast. One fateful day, when the house was empty, she grabbed him by his cloak and pleaded, "Lie with me." Joseph knew the danger and fled, leaving his garment in her hands. His heart pounded, but he knew he had done the right thing. Enraged by rejection, Zuleika's desire turned to fury. She screamed, summoning the household servants, and held up Joseph's cloak as evidence. "Look, the Hebrew slave my husband brought tried to attack me, but I screamed, and he fled, leaving his robe behind." When Potiphar heard this, his wrath burned. Without trial or defense, Joseph was stripped of his position and dragged away, condemned to the Pharaoh's prison. Once again, he had lost everything. But what no one knew was that even in prison, Joseph's journey was far from over. God's plan was still unfolding. Chapter 6. From Prison to Purpose. The cold walls of the prison became Joseph's new home. Darkness and the stench of dampness surrounded him, but even there, God was with him. Over time, his character and leadership qualities set him apart. The warden took notice and entrusted Joseph with overseeing the other prisoners. Even in chains, Joseph found purpose. Then, fate introduced him to two unlikely companions, the Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. Both had been thrown into prison for offenses against the king. One night, they each had troubling dreams that they could not understand. Joseph, knowing that interpretations belonged to God, offered to help. The cupbearer spoke first. He saw a vine with 3 branches that produced grapes, which he pressed into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph smiled and said, "In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position." Encouraged, the baker shared his dream. 3 baskets of bread on his head, but birds came and ate from them. Joseph's face grew solemn. "In 3 days, Pharaoh will have you executed." And just as Joseph said, the dreams came true. Before the cupbearer left, Joseph made one request. "Remember me when you stand before Pharaoh." But as soon as he was restored to his position, the cupbearer forgot Joseph completely. Chapter 7. Pharaoh's Dream and Joseph's Rise to Power. 2 years passed, and Joseph remained in prison, forgotten by the cupbearer. But God had not forgotten him. One night, Pharaoh had two troubling dreams. In the first, 7 fat, healthy cows emerged from the Nile, only to be devoured by 7 thin, sickly cows. In the second, 7 full heads of grain were swallowed by 7 scorched and withered ones. None of the magicians or wise men in Egypt could interpret them. Then, at that moment, the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. When I was in prison, I met a Hebrew who interpreted my dream with perfect accuracy, he told Pharaoh. Without delay, Joseph was summoned. After 2 long years, he was finally brought before the ruler of Egypt. Standing before Pharaoh, Joseph listened carefully to the dreams and then confidently declared, "The 2 dreams are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will be 7 years of great abundance throughout Egypt, followed by 7 years of severe famine." The court fell silent. Pharaoh's face was filled with concern. "Now, let Pharaoh find a wise and discerning man to oversee the land and store food during the years of plenty," Joseph continued. Pharaoh, astonished by Joseph's wisdom, turned to his advisors and asked, "Can we find anyone like this man, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then, looking at Joseph, he declared, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people will submit to your orders. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." At that moment, Joseph, the former slave and prisoner, was clothed in fine linen, adorned with Pharaoh's signet ring, and placed in a chariot second only to the king's. Egypt had a new governor, one who had been chosen and prepared by God. Chapter 8. The Famine and the Brothers' Journey to Egypt. The 7 years of abundance came as Joseph had foretold. Under his leadership, vast storehouses were filled with grain. Egypt flourished, and the people rejoiced. But Joseph never forgot what was to come. As soon as the years of plenty ended, the land was struck by famine. Crops withered, and hunger spread across the nations. People from every land came to Egypt seeking relief. Meanwhile, in Canaan, Jacob and his sons faced the harsh reality of starvation. Hearing that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to buy food, keeping Benjamin, the youngest, at home. The brothers arrived and were taken to the governor of Egypt, Joseph. Yet, they did not recognize him. Standing before them was their long-lost brother, now a powerful ruler. Joseph, however, recognized them immediately. His heart pounded, torn between love and justice. He decided to test them. "You are spies. You have come to see the weakness of our land," he accused. Trembling, they denied it. "We are honest men. We are 12 brothers. The youngest is with our father, and one is no more." Joseph ordered them to bring Benjamin as proof of their honesty. Keeping Simeon as a hostage, he allowed the others to return with grain. As they left, they found that their silver had been secretly placed back in their sacks. Fear gripped them. What was happening? Chapter 9. The Final Test and Joseph's Revelation. Back in Canaan, the brothers told Jacob everything. But the thought of losing Benjamin devastated him. However, as the famine worsened, he had no choice. With great sorrow, he allowed Benjamin to go. The brothers returned to Egypt, this time with their youngest sibling. Seeing Benjamin for the first time filled Joseph with emotion. He secretly wept but continued the test. He hosted a great feast for them, but when they prepared to leave, he had his silver cup hidden in Benjamin's sack. As they departed, Joseph's steward stopped them. "Why have you repaid good with evil? My master's cup has been stolen." Terrified, the brothers protested their innocence. But when the cup was found in Benjamin's possession, they were speechless. They were brought back before Joseph, and Judah stepped forward. "Please, let me take my brother's place. If he does not return, our father will die from grief." Hearing Judah's selfless plea, Joseph could contain himself no longer. Overcome with emotion, he sent everyone else out of the room. Then, weeping loudly, he revealed himself. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers stood frozen in fear. But Joseph reassured them, "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me, for it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." His words, filled with forgiveness, broke their hearts. Tears flowed as the family was restored. Joseph sent for Jacob, and Pharaoh granted his family the best land in Egypt, Goshen. The long years of separation, pain, and regret ended in redemption. What the brothers meant for evil, God had turned for good. Chapter 10. The reunion with Jacob and the restoration of the family. The wind swept across the desert, lifting clouds of dust as the caravans slowly made their way toward Egypt. Among them was Jacob, the patriarch, traveling in a royal chariot, something unimaginable for a man who had spent years believing that his beloved son was dead. The news that Joseph was alive still echoed in his heart like an impossible dream, but every mile that passed brought him closer to reality. When they arrived in the fertile land of Goshen, Jacob's eyes filled with tears as he saw, in the distance, a figure he thought he would never see again. There stood Joseph, waiting for him. The governor of Egypt, dressed in royal garments, was no longer the fragile young boy who had vanished years ago, but a strong and wise man, bearing the marks of time and God's providence. As soon as he descended from the chariot, Jacob could no longer contain his emotions. Joseph ran toward him and embraced him tightly, weeping like a child. "Father, it's me, Joseph." Jacob, trembling, held his son's face, as if trying to confirm that this was real. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "Now I can die in peace, for I have seen your face and know that you are alive." Joseph's heart was full. Time had not erased the promise. God had restored his family. Chapter 11. Pharaoh's blessing and Israel's establishment in Egypt. The days passed, and Joseph brought his father before Pharaoh. The mighty ruler of Egypt looked at Jacob with curiosity. The old patriarch, bent with age but filled with divine wisdom, blessed Pharaoh. "My days have been difficult and few compared to my ancestors, but the God of my fathers has been faithful." Impressed, Pharaoh granted Jacob and his family the best land in Egypt, Goshen, where the children of Israel would grow and prosper. Under Joseph's leadership, the land of Egypt navigated through the famine successfully. As the years passed, Jacob's family multiplied greatly. The once small clan was becoming a great nation. But even in the midst of prosperity, Joseph knew that Egypt was not their final destination. Their calling was to return to Canaan, the land of promise. Jacob, now old and nearing the end of his days, gathered his sons to bless them. He prophesied over each one, declaring their futures and destinies. To Judah, he gave a promise that would echo through history. "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until the one to whom it belongs shall come." This prophecy foretold the coming of the Messiah, the future king who would bring salvation to all nations. Chapter 12. Jacob's last words and his burial in Canaan. As his strength faded, Jacob made his sons swear a final oath. "When I die, do not bury me in Egypt, but take me back to the land of my fathers, to the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Isaac rest." With his last breath, Jacob reminded them that Egypt was only temporary. Their true home was in Canaan. When Jacob passed away, grief filled the household of Israel. With Pharaoh's permission, Joseph led a grand procession to Canaan to fulfill his father's wish. Egyptian chariots, soldiers, and servants accompanied the journey, honoring the man whose God had blessed both Israel and Egypt. At the cave of Machpelah, Jacob was laid to rest beside his forefathers. His sons, standing together, realized that despite their conflicts and divisions, they were bound by a greater purpose. But even as they returned to Egypt, a lingering fear settled in the hearts of Joseph's brothers. Would he now seek revenge? Chapter 13. Joseph's forgiveness and the final promise. After Jacob's burial, the brothers came before Joseph, trembling. "Now that our father is gone, will you punish us for what we did to you?" They feared that the mercy he had shown was only because of their father's presence. But Joseph, seeing their fear, reassured them with one of the most powerful statements in all of history. With tears in his eyes, he said, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." The weight of their guilt was lifted. Joseph had no desire for revenge. He had learned that God's plan was greater than their failures. Instead of seeking retribution, he promised to take care of them and their children. The cycle was sealed with grace, forgiveness, and redemption. Joseph continued to govern Egypt with wisdom, and his family thrived. The years passed, and as Joseph grew old, he called his relatives and made them swear an oath. "When God comes to your aid and leads you out of this land, take my bones with you." He knew that one day, God would fulfill his promise and lead Israel back to Canaan. And so, Joseph died, but his story did not end there. His body was embalmed and kept in Egypt, waiting for the day when God would deliver his people. And centuries later, when Moses led the Israelites out of slavery, they carried Joseph's remains with them, fulfilling the promise made long ago. Joseph's story is one of the greatest testimonies that God turns trials into triumphs. Sold into slavery, falsely accused, and forgotten in prison, he never lost faith. And in the end, his trials led him to his destiny. Through pain and betrayal, God worked everything for good. If you are facing hardships, remember, what seems like failure may be part of God's greater plan for your life. Trust in his timing, for he never forgets his promises. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content. Stay blessed, and see you next time on Testaments of Faith. Thank you.